네, 2021 Trade Week 개막식을 시작하겠습니다.
We will now begin the opening ceremony of the 2021 Trade Week. Good afternoon, I am Jeon Sung-cho, the moderator of today's event. I would like to thank everybody for being here despite your busy schedules. The 2021 Trade Week consists of programs for B2B and B2C exports to assist SMEs, including online biz matching, product launching shows, trade conferences for response measures and export strategies, and live commerce to explore online markets that may bring down trade barriers. We have prepared programs that may be of benefit to SMEs in Korea. We hope that this event will further promote Seoul's reputation as a global trade hub. Today's opening ceremony is being streamed live on our YouTube channel in Korean and English and the Arirang TV channel. Before we begin, we'll watch the opening video. So, we will now introduce the guests who are with us to congratulate the opening of the 2021 Trade Week. First, we have Ambassador Juan Carlos Caiza Rosero from the Colombian Embassy. Please welcome him. Could you please stand from your seat? Thank you very much. Next, we have Ambassador Daul Matute Mejia from the Embassy of Peru. Please welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you for standing up.
Next, we have Minister Counselor Christophe Best from the EU Embassy in Korea, who is here for Ambassador Maria Castillo Fernandez.
So that the audience can see your face? No? 네, 그럼 다음으로 넘어가겠습니다. 네,
Next,
호주 상공회의소 로안
Executive Director Royan Petts from the Australian Chamber of Commerce in Korea. Thank you.
다음은
Next, please welcome Chairperson Tony Garrett from the New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. He's just joined us. Welcome. Next, Chairperson Lee Hwa-jun from the Korea-Russia Chamber of Commerce. Please welcome Chairperson Lee Hwa-jun. Next, Director General of Economy and Employment Planning, Mr. Park Dae-woo from the Seoul Metropolitan Government. Welcome. Next, please welcome Chairman Han Dong-yeol of SBA. Next, I'd like to introduce President Kim Hyun-woo of SBA. Please welcome him with a round of applause. We would like to thank the ambassadors from the Embassy of Colombia, the Embassy of Peru, the Embassy of the EU, the Embassy of Vietnam, and the presidents of the Chambers of Commerce of Russia, Australia, New Zealand, as well as the many guests from Peru, Germany, France, the Philippines, Indonesia, the UK, Myanmar, Kenya, Ukraine, the High Seoul Enterprise Association, the Women's Business Association, the Korea Cosmetics Export Association, and the Super Rookie Alumni Association. Next up, we will hear the opening address from President Kim Hyun-woo of the SBA. Please welcome him with a round of applause. Please come up to the stage. We will now hear from President Kim Hyun-woo of the SBA. Good afternoon. I am Kim Hyun-woo, President of the SBA. This is a very meaningful day. I would like to welcome all of our offline as well as online participants to the 2021 Trade Week. I especially want to thank the Director General Park Tae-woo from the Seoul Metropolitan Government and Ambassador Juan Carlos Caiza Rosero from the Colombian Embassy and Ambassador Raúl Matute Mejia from the Embassy of Peru, as well as the many other ambassadors and the chairpersons of the Chambers of Commerce and the leaders of SME-related associations. I would also like to thank the CEOs and executives of the many companies who are joining us online. Thank you once again for your interest and support for today's event. In November, we recorded $60 billion in monthly exports despite the COVID pandemic. However, there are still many SMEs in Korea for whom overseas expansion is not an easy task. And this is why we need to give support to those SMEs who are attempting to launch their products in the overseas markets. And we have no doubt that COVID-19 will one day disappear, and the world is making the transition to online from offline. And we have proven that it is possible to unfold our businesses online. In line with these trends, the SBA has built a platform to allow information sharing between SMEs and foreign buyers called Trade On. This is to create quality database and to enable online trade transactions. So this will further promote trade between SMEs in Korea and foreign buyers. And I believe that this first Trade Week will be an opportunity for SMEs to embark on overseas trade. We have live commerce, we also have online biz matching, we also have product launching shows. Also, we have a conference. All of these programs that we have prepared for the 2021 Trade Week will further boost the global competitiveness of Korean SMEs. And the SBA is always thinking forward for the SMEs in Korea. And we have great pride in this.
트레이드 위크뿐만 아니라
So it's not just for this trade week. I hope that more and more SMEs will be able to participate in programs like this. Once again, I would like to thank the many participants, online and offline. Thank you.
네, 김현우 서울산업진흥원
Thank you, CEO Mr. Hyunwoo Kim, for your remarks. Next, we will hear the congratulatory remarks by Mr. Oh Se-hoon, Mayor of Seoul. Please let's watch the video. Hello, I'm Oh Se-hoon, Mayor of Seoul. I sincerely congratulate you on the opening of 2021 Trade Week. The prolonged COVID-19 pandemic is giving a hard time to our small and medium-sized enterprises. So let me thank Mr. Kim Hyun-wook, CEO of Seoul Business Agency, and the organizers for putting this meaningful event together. COVID-19 has brought upon us an unprecedented era of innovation, and now, more than ever, we need more strategic approaches, not only in the political and diplomatic fields, but also in trade and commerce. This Trade Week event, being held against this backdrop, will serve as an invaluable opportunity for our SMEs to be globally acknowledged for their technological prowess and competitiveness. Currently, it's hard for our companies to meet with foreign buyers in person. So Sevitseom has been turned into the venue where they can virtually meet regardless of time differences. For the next 4 days, starting from today, 300 Seoul-based SMEs and 500 international buyers will participate to discuss export ideas. So I sincerely ask for your interest and support. The Seoul Metropolitan government believes that the city of Seoul's competitiveness determines the national competitiveness of Korea. So we'll be committed to promoting overseas expansion of Korean SMEs and strengthening our support so that they can lead the trends in global trade. Once again, I congratulate you on the opening of 2021 Trade Week, and I send my best wishes to all the SMEs in Seoul who are dedicated to achieving their goals despite the challenges at home and abroad. Thank you.
네, 정말 바쁜 일정 속에 식사리에 주신 오세훈 서울시장님께 이 자리를 빌어
Thank you, Mayor Oh Se-hoon, for your remarks despite your busy schedules.
콜롬비아 대사관 후안 카를로스 카이사 로세로 대사님의
Next, Ambassador Juan Carlos Caiza Rosero from the Embassy of Colombia will give his congratulatory remarks. Please welcome him to the stage.
Dear Mr. Kim Hyun-woo, CEO, Seoul Business Agency,
Kim Hyun-woo
Han Dong-yo,
대표이사님,
Chairman SBA, Mr. Park Dae-woo, Director General
사장님,
of Economy Employment Planning Bureau of Seoul Administration,
박대우 국장님,
Mr. Rowan Pets, Chairman, Australian Chamber of Commerce in Korea, Ambassadors, my friend, Ambassador of Peru,
페루
Raúl Matute,
대사님,
Colombia is
상공회의소
part of the
로안페츠
Pacific
대표
Alliance.
이사님,
Pacific Alliance is the first market in America between Peru,
태평양의 동맹은
Colombia,
페루,
Chile, and
콜롬비아,
Mexico.
칠레, 멕시코를
Dear
이어주는
representatives
굉장히
from
중요한
Seoul Metropolitan Government,
동맹입니다.
from the Diplomatic Corps, and from the Korean entrepreneurship ecosystem and its companies. Dear
뿐만
all,
아니라 저희 서울
it's an honor for me to be
시
invited to take part
비롯한
in the
중소기업 협회장님 많은 분들이
2021
오늘
Trade
자리에
Week
오셨는데요.
organized by the Seoul Metropolitan Government and the
서울시
Seoul business around such an important and
그리고
pertinent thematic startups and
서울
entrepreneurs.
산업진흥원이 주최하는 2021 트레이드 위크를 축하드립니다.
That Seoul has made towards the
서울이
achievement of a
지금까지
proper
이룬
enabling
성과를
environment for the
축하하는
creation and
그런
development
자리이기도
of
하고요.
startups and small and media enterprises.
뿐만 아니라 중소기업을 위해서 굉장히
that I
많은
am
노력을
truly
해왔고
inspired by the
그
different policies,
성과들을
programs,
확인할
and
수 있는
ecosystems
자리입니다.
that the city
굉장히
has
많은
enabled to
프로그램
foster
그리고
the
생태계를 통해서
entrepreneurship in the
현재
city, along with the strong support
서울의 많은
of
기업들을
SBA.
지원을
In
하고
these challenging
있습니다.
times,
서울
I hope
산업진흥원의
that
노력
this kind of
덕분인데요.
event
이렇게 어려운 시기에 저희가 더욱더 중소기업들의 힘을 실어줄 수 있는 계기가 되기를 바라고 뿐만 아니라 또 경쟁력을 제고할 수 있기를 바랍니다. 그래서 베스트 프랙티스를 통해서 수출을 하고 콜롬비아도 이러한 경험을 한국을 통해서 배워서 양자 관계를 더욱더 돈독히 할 수 있기를 기대합니다. 뿐만 아니라 여러 양자 도구가 있죠. 예를 들면 서울 산업진흥원 그리고 선자부 간에 MOU가 있습니다. 이런 MOU를 통해서 계속해서 교류를 할 수 있는 계기가 되고 있습니다. 내년에는 수교 관계 60주년을 기념해서 이러한 도구를 활용해서 단순히 과거의 경험을 비춰보는 것이 아니라 더욱더 중소기업의 두 국가의 중소기업의 미래를 위해 힘쓸 수 있기를 바랍니다. 성공적인 개최를 기원드립니다. 감사드립니다.
네, 주한 콜롬비아 대사관
Thank you, Ambassador Juan Carlos Caicedo Cero from the Colombian Embassy for your remarks.
Now, let me invite Ambassador Dao Matute Mejia from the Embassy of Peru in Seoul. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Please give him a round of applause. 네, 현재 무대로 이동하고 계십니다.
안녕하십니까.
Hello, good evening.
Honorable Han Duk-jeol, members also of Seoul Business Agency,
서울 산업진흥원
of the
김현우
Seoul
대표
Metropolitan
이사님,
Government,
그리고 서울특별시
Australia Chamber of Commerce,
여러 관계자 여러분, 그리고
my dear ambassador yes, of Vietnam, I have meeting today.
네, 주한 베트남 대사관의 응유엔 대사님, 그리고
Carlos
또
Caicedo,
제 동료 주한 콜롬비아 대사관의 후안 카를로스 카이사 대사님, 그리고 여러 대사님들 및 내외 귀빈
it
여러분,
is my pleasure to offer a congratulatory remarks
오늘
in this important
이렇게
festival.
중요한
2021
행사인
Trade
2021 트레이드 위크에 참여해서 이렇게 축사를 드릴 수 있어서 정말 기쁩니다. 이번 행사는 12월 7일부터 10일까지 이곳 세비섬에서 개최되게 되는데요. 이렇게 이런 행사를 통해서 한국의 중소기업들이 새로운 제품들을 홍보를 하고 특히 바이오케미컬이나 전자나 ICT 제품들이라던가 혹은 또 라이프스타일 이런 여러 부분에서 제품들을 홍보할 수 있는 기회가 될 것이고요. 또한 글로벌 마켓에 여러 그 바이어들에게 소개할 수 있는 자리가 될 것으로 생각이 됩니다. 이렇게 새로운 한국의 제품들에 관심이 많고요. 저희 페루에서는 그리고 많은 수입들을 또 하고 있습니다. 이를 통해서 우리 페루와 한국 간의 어떤 무역 관계를 더 양자 무역 관계를 더 개선해 나가고 있습니다. 특히 한국의 중소 대기업 모두는요, 저희 페루에 기꺼이 초대를 드리고 싶고요. 페루까지 여행을 하셔서요, 저희의 이제 제품을 또 홍보해 주시고 알려주시기 바랍니다. 저희도 한국 시장을 더 많이 이제 탐험을 하고 있고 한국 시장에 저희는 더 열려 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 계속해서 더 이런 관계들을 모색을 하고 서로 열린 관계들을 가져갔으면 좋겠습니다. 다시 한번 이 자리에 초대해 주셔서 감사드리고요. 이렇게 중요한 행사에 초대를 감사드립니다. 특히 페루에서도 많은 기대를 하고 있겠습니다. 감사합니다.
네, 축사를 해주신 주한 페루 대사관.
Thank you, Ambassador Jao Matute Mejia, for your remarks. Now,
루안 패츠 대표이사님.
last but not least, let me invite Executive Director Mr. Ruan Pats at the Australian Chamber of Commerce in Korea for his congratulatory remarks. Please welcome him with a big hand.
네, 안녕하십니까.
Hello.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
네,
As the
내외
Executive
기빈
Director
여러분,
of the Australian Chamber of Commerce
주한
in South
호주
Korea,
상공회의소의
It is my great
대표
honor to be here
이사로서
tonight
오늘 이렇게
with you all.
여러분과
I'd
함께
like to
자리를 할 수
formally
있어서
thank
너무나
the Seoul
기쁩니다.
Business Agency
특히
for
서울산업진흥원에
the invitation
이렇게
to tonight's
오늘의 이렇게
very
굉장히
special event.
중요한 행사에 초대해 주셔서 감사의
I would like to
말씀을 드리고자
particularly
합니다.
thank
특히
and acknowledge
감사드리고
Park
싶은
Hae-woo,
분들이
Director General
계신데요.
of Economy and
서울특별시
Employment,
경제
Planning Bureau
일자리
at the Seoul
기획관이신
Metropolitan
박대우
Government.
국장님, 그리고 서울산업진흥원의
한동열, the chairman of the Seoul
한동열
Business Agency.
이사장님,
Kim Hyung-gu,
그리고
the president of the Seoul Business
서울
Agency.
산업진흥원의
And along with
김현우
all the
대표
ambassadors here
이사님,
tonight,
그리고 또한 오늘 자리에 함께해 주신 여러 대사님들과 그리고 국내외 정부와 기업과 상공회의소의 귀빈 여러분들께 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 지난 20개월 동안의 전 세계는 코로나 팬데믹으로 참 힘들었습니다. 많은 좀 큰 규모의 기업들은 성공적으로 이런 여러 가지 어려움을 헤쳐 나갔지만 좀 더 작은 규모의 기업들이나 중소기업들은 이렇게 국가 간의 어떤 제약들이라던가 빠르게 변화하는 사회적 거리두기 정책들, 또 글로벌 공급망 적체 이런 환경에서 해결책을 찾기 매우 힘들어하고 있습니다. 호주 상공회의소와 호주의 기업들은 특히 서울산업진흥원에서 이렇게 2021 트레이드 위크를 온오프라인으로 개최해 주셔서 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 본 행사는 서울의 유망한 수출 기업들이 해외 바이어들에게 제품을 홍보할 수 있는 그런 기회를 제공할 것입니다. 한국과 유사하게 전 세계 정부들도 위드 코로나 전략을 이어가고 있습니다. 저는 지금이야말로 이렇게 중소기업들이 선제적으로 이제 무역과 투자가 정상화되는 상황에 대비해서 이들을 선제적으로 더 지원해 줄 때라고 생각을 합니다. 저희 상공회의소는 중소기업들이 코로나19로 인한 위기들을 헤쳐나갈 수 있도록 더 적극적으로 지원하도록 하겠고요. 여러 관련 정책들을 정보 공유를 하고 또 산업 관련 웨비나를 개최하고 또 온오프라인으로 라운드 테이블 토론을 개최하면서 또 소기업 지원 프로그램들을 출범할 것입니다. 회원사들을 보유한 조직으로서 저희 상공회의소는 약 130여 개 사들을 대표하고 있습니다. 저는 특히 다양한 업계의 중소기업들과 함께 일을 해온 그 결과로 저는 이렇게 성장하는 플레이어들을 지원을 해주는 것이, 그리고 굳건한 지원을 해주는 것이 정말 필수적이라고 생각을 합니다. 세계 무역을 활성화하는 데 있어서 2021 트레이드 위크는 1,200번의 온라인 수출 상담 회의를 더 촉진을 할 것이고, 이것은 20개국 이상의 500여 해외 바이어들과 함께하게 될 것입니다. 이것은 특히 현재 상황을 고려했을 때 정말로 놀라운 성과가 아닐 수가 없습니다. 주한 호주 상공회의소를 대표해서 다시 한번 서울산업진흥회에 축하의 말씀을 드리고요. 이 2021 트레이드 위크에 참여하시는 모든 분들의 성공을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
네, 주한 호주 상공회의소 루안 패츠 대표이사님의 축하 말씀 감사드립니다.
Executive Director for giving us a congratulatory speech despite his busy schedules. This concludes the official opening ceremony of 2021 Trade Week. I'm sure it's the end of the year time. You must all be very busy, but let me make this opportunity to once again thank all those who have joined us this evening. The official streaming via our YouTube channels will now end, and the keynote speech by Mr. John Levy will be aired on Arirang TV. So please stay tuned with Arirang TV. Thank you. So today's last event is the gala dinner and the networking event. The dinner
Hi everybody,
will be
I'm
served
John
in
Levy.
this
I am
conference
so excited
hall.
to be here during Seoul
So
Trade Week.
please
And when
remain
we were preparing
seated.
this talk, I wanted to make it as interactive and as playful as
I hope
possible.
that you will
So
all enjoy
the
your
first
dinner and
question
have a
I almost
wonderful
get
time. Thank
every
you.
time I speak is, what is a behavioral scientist? And so I came up with a really fun way to demonstrate this. And you're all going to need your phones. So quickly grab your phones and put them face down. And I want you to look at your phones and you'll notice that don't look at your phones. Keep them face down. And I want you from memory to think, what is the app on the bottom right corner of your screen? Okay, take a moment to do that. All right, now once you're sure, I want you to quickly take a look and see if you were right. Okay, were you right? Were you wrong? You'll notice about half of you were wrong and about half of you say you're right. But I want you to do one more thing. I want you to close your eyes. Okay, go ahead. And I want you to tell me what time was just displayed on your screen without looking. Now, if you're like most people, you have no idea what time it is. And that's not a shortcoming of your brain. It's in fact the way that the brain is designed. It's called inattentional blindness. We can only notice basically what it is we know to look for. I'll give you another fun example. This is a scan of human lungs. And doctors look at them and look for discolorations or shadows and to see if there's an infection, a problem, maybe cancer. Tell me if you notice anything. Now, here's what's wild. Maybe some of you noticed something kind of strange, that there's a gorilla inside the picture. Here's what's even wilder. Professional radiologists, people who look at these types of scans, only 17% of them noticed this gorilla. And it's not because they're bad at their job. It's because the human brain will notice what you tell it to look for and will miss just about everything else. And this process called inattentional blindness is happening constantly. Now, the problem is that a lot of what we're missing is actually important. Some of those things are things that if we were aware of them would make us far more successful and effective. And some of those things are things that we think work really well and actually don't. As a behavioral scientist, my job is to figure out how those gears work in your head. And to show us our blind spots, those things that we don't notice that would make us far more successful when it comes to connecting with customers, expanding our business, building meaningful relationships, and affecting our success. And that's why I'm here today. You see, what got me interested in all of this was these two men, Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. They were curious about the obesity epidemic. They were curious, is obesity something that spreads from person to person like a cold? Or is it a percentage of the population like Alzheimer's? Right? You don't get Alzheimer's shaking hands with somebody who has Alzheimer's. And what they found was absolutely startling. They found that if you have a friend who's obese, your chances increase by about 45%. Your friends who do not know them have a 20% increased chance. And their friends have a 5% increased chance. I want you to think about this. Your friends' friends have an effect on your life. And this kind of effect is true for happiness, marriage and divorce rates, smoking habits, voting habits. Basically, anything we care about is a byproduct of these relationships. Behavior is contagious. So I began to realize that the way that most of us act in business doesn't necessarily make sense. You see, we often focus on making relationships with key people, and then we only contact those people when it's really essential. But instead, if those are people we respect and admire, our objective should be to connect them with other people that we respect and admire, so that those positive characteristics, those business skills, their knowledge, spread from person to person. And instead, what we have is a network or a community. Because as those relationships get closer, and you're in the middle of that group, then your ability to impact it and be impacted by them increases dramatically. And that's what my work focuses on. You see, what I did with this was absolutely ridiculous. I spent most of my adult life convincing people to come to my home, cook me dinner, wash my dishes, clean my floors, and then the weirdest thing is, they thanked me for it. I created something called the Influencers Dinner. 12 people were invited at a time. They're not allowed to talk about what they do or even give their last name. They cook dinner, and when they sit down to eat, they find out they're with Nobel laureates, Olympic medalists, CEOs of major companies, famous business leaders and thought leaders and celebrities. I've hosted over 2,000 people at 240 dinners across 10 cities and 3 countries. And as a byproduct, my life has been changed forever. You see, the reason that I was able to do all of this is because I have an understanding of the way that the brain works. Now, I have to ask you an important question. What percentage of the brain do we use? Think about this. The most common answers I get is either 10% or 20%. It's become kind of popular in films. And what's interesting about this is that we actually use 100% of our brains. But it's more like playing the piano. We only hit the keys that we need when we need them. If we were to hit all of them simultaneously, it would make a lot of noise and probably wouldn't be that pleasant. Instead, the way that the brain generally tends to make decisions is in these areas of the brain that are not conscious. These areas that are defined by our emotions, our biases, and our mechanics. And that conscious part of the brain, that very small percentage that we control, that we decide where we walk or who we talk to, tends to just convince us that our decisions are a good idea. And the perfect example for this, at least for me, is every morning I'll eat a really healthy breakfast. And then by 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll walk into my kitchen, and if there's a candy bar on the table, by 6:01, that candy bar is gone, and I have never been more creative in explaining why I deserve it. And that's because most of the decisions that we make are emotional, like wanting that candy bar. And then we use our logic to justify it. As a behavioral scientist, what I'm really curious about is understanding what's running the show in the background, what's in our blind spots, what's our inattentional blindness missing, and how do we use that to become more effective? And that's what we're going to tackle right now. So here's what's wild. When you look at the greatest predictor of your team's success, it's something called psychological safety, a sense of belonging, that you're part of the group, that you can express your ideas without risk of being kicked out. When you look at the predictors of team success or corporate success, company stock value, employee sick days, profitability, you can measure it to the level of trust at an organization. And if we really take that into account and begin to look at our effectiveness, and what I've learned from running these dinners for well over a decade, is that our ability to have an impact, our ability to succeed, is a byproduct of 3 factors. Who we're connected to, because if you're not connected to somebody, it's really hard to affect them. You know this as you try to expand your business. You go out there and you want to connect with key individuals who could really have an impact. The second is our level of trust, because if somebody doesn't trust us, they're not going to opt in for our influence. And the third is the sense of belonging or community that we share. As we discussed earlier, the more connected we are, the greater chance that we'll affect each other positively. I call this the influence equation. Our influence is a byproduct of who we're connected to, times how much they trust us, to the sense of community or belonging. And if we can figure out how each of these works, then the only limitation on your success, on your ability to impact your results, is what you want to use it for. So let's dive in. Now, during everything that's been taking place, especially with COVID, we have to acknowledge one important factor. And that is that right now, we're separated more than we have been in a long time. In fact, a researcher by the name of Allen from MIT in the US was curious, what defines your connectivity with people, the amount that you communicate? And he found that communication grows exponentially the closer 2 people's desks are. So you will text, Slack, chat, email, everything, more with people who sit closer to you. Now, by the time we reach about 50 meters, we might as well be on different planets. And right now, especially as we shelter at home, or we try to build connections at countries around the world, whether it's Europe, the US, Latin America, people are more than 50 meters away. You see, what's wild about this is that the biggest predictors of our success are these relationships. And at least in the US, I can tell you, we're more disconnected than ever. When we look at friendships in the US, in 1985, the average American had 3 close friends besides family. By 2004, less than a generation later, we were down to 2. And now, due to the pandemic, we are fundamentally more lonely than we've ever been, which means that we have a unique opportunity. People want to connect now more than ever. We are fundamentally, as a society, looking to develop deeper and more meaningful relationships. And that means that when it comes to our business, we have an opportunity to connect with people meaningfully. You see, the problem is, though, that at least when I was growing up, I was given this advice. If you want to succeed, you have to get out there and network. But let's be honest, networking stinks. It's absolutely terrible. In fact, researchers found that when people bring up the topic of networking, the association is that we feel dirty and we want to wash ourselves. It's because it doesn't feel natural to us to do this. We don't want to have relationships just to use people. Instead, what we want are friendships. And if you look, research shows that we don't feel that way about friendships. No matter if we're extroverted or introverted, we all want to be friends with people. So the point is that if we want to connect, instead of trying to network and have kind of these unreal relationships, what we want to do is take strangers, turn them into friends, and friends into a community of customers or business partners. So the question is, how do we actually do that? And to explain, I'm going to tell you a crazy story. Okay, the year is 1911, August, almost exactly 100 years ago. And a man walks into the Louvre, this museum in France, the largest building in the world at the time, walks into the Renaissance section, sees some random painting on the wall, and literally rips it off of the wall, puts it under his workman's smock, and walks out. It took about 24 hours for anybody to even notice it was missing, and suddenly, newspapers around the world were publishing stories about this obscure painting that nobody had heard of, and the theft. Overnight, it became famous. For the next 3 years, detectives search, trying to track down the painting, and nobody finds it. In the meantime, thousands of people stand in line just to see the empty spot on the wall. And after 3 years, the thief made a daring move. He went to Italy to try to sell the painting, and in the process got arrested, and the painting was returned. You see, you may have guessed which painting this is, because it's now the most famous painting of all time, and many call it the greatest painting of all time. It is the Mona Lisa. But here's what's wild about the Mona Lisa. Most art historians don't actually consider it such a great painting. It is simply famous for being stolen. And now 8 million people a year go to see it just because there were all these news stories about it. And this points to an interesting characteristic of human beings. It's called the mere exposure effect. Quite simply, the more we're exposed to something, the more we tend to like it and trust it. And so when we look at the way that we connect with people, we have to be aware of this. In fact, I did a scientific study, and we found that when looking at people dating on mobile apps, if you have the same initials, meaning the first letters of your names, you're 11.3% more likely to date. Anything that reminds us of ourselves is actually more appealing. Which is why when we look at the way that most people connect, they connect through common ground, either having shared interests, you both participate in a sport, activities, or maybe it's culture or religion, things like that. Maybe you're both fans of the same sports team. And this is what's important to understand, that if we want to connect with people, we want to find common ground. That's our first option. And here's a ridiculous game that I invented called Get to Know You Bingo. And it works really simply. I'll sometimes get on a Zoom meeting with a few people and I say, I want to get to know you. And each square represents an area of possible common ground. So we find out if we have the same number of children. We find out if we have the same favorite books or if we're binge watching the same shows. And here's what's interesting. In the process, one of two things will happen. Either we'll find our common ground and we'll feel more connected to each other. Or if I find out that, currently I don't have any children, but you have 3, and that you really like to vacation in certain places, suddenly you have depth of character. You seem more interesting. And the more familiar I am with you, the more I am exposed to you in that way, the more I'll feel connected to you. The other option is creating common ground. And to create common ground, what we need to do is actually find things that we can do together. Now, before I dive into that, I want to get into the second part of the equation, trust. Because there's a fundamental misconception about the way we build trust. So if I want you to trust me, the contemporary model is, okay, I'm going to win you over with a gift. But you know this, if you've ever been taken out for a business dinner, they can be really awkward. Or if you've ever gone to a party and they give you a gift bag, you tend to either throw it out or re-gift it. So it raises the question, what would actually get you to like and trust me more? And the answer is the exact opposite. It's called the IKEA effect. And the IKEA effect states that we disproportionately care about our IKEA furniture because we had to assemble it. In fact, anything we invest effort into, we care about more. So instead of trying to win you over with a gift, I should find ways for you to invest effort into our relationship and me back. So us going on a run together or a walk, playing games together, cooking together, or even doing an art class, whatever it is that's natural to you. It's why at my dinners, the guests cook together. Because as they invest effort into one another, they care more about each other and trust each other more. Now, here's a little trick for how you actually apply it. I call it stacking. You see, researchers had people go into the street and ask for complicated directions. And nobody really gave it to them. And then they had another group go out and ask people for the time. And when people gave them the time, they then asked for directions. And they almost always got it. And the reason is the IKEA effect. Once somebody puts in a little bit of effort into your relationship, then they're willing to put in much more. I know this is counterintuitive because we're asking for more in total, but it actually works. Which means that, let's say you want to connect with a potential customer or representative in another country. Well, emailing them with a long explanation of what you're actually looking for might be overwhelming. Instead, let's use this idea of stacking. Let's get them to put in a small amount of effort. Ask them for their opinion on something. Ask them for a recommendation for a book, or if you would like to understand their products or services better. As a byproduct of them investing that initial response, something very small that they could do over email really quickly. Then you've become more familiar, and that investment of effort will cause them to respond further when you follow up again. So you've gotten their opinion, then you follow up a few days later and you say, wow, that was really helpful. This is how I use this information. Can I actually chat with you about it for a few minutes? And suddenly, what would have been seen as a large request seems really reasonable. And this is how relationships are built, through an investment of effort. In fact, for years, I was curious why the IKEA effect works. And it works because of what trust is actually made of. You see, trust is built out of something called a vulnerability loop. And the problem is that most people think that trust comes before vulnerability. It actually doesn't. So a vulnerability loop works like this. There are two people. Person one signals vulnerability. I say, wow, publishing my new book, You're Invited, has been one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'm really tired. I've just signaled vulnerability. If you, in a conversation with me, then ignore me or make fun of me, trust will be reduced. But if you signal vulnerability back and say, John, I know how you feel. I've been sheltering at home. It's been really tough on me. I'm feeling really worn out. Suddenly, the moment I see that, you've both shown that we can be vulnerable to the same level, and trust is increased. This is how trust is built. Person one signals vulnerability. Person two acknowledges it. Person Number 2 signals vulnerability back, and person 1 sees that. Trust is increased. And this is the basic unit of how to build trust with people. So when I email a person and ask for their opinion, I'm opening a vulnerability loop. Now, let me be very clear. What does trust, or rather vulnerability, look like in the business world? Well, it doesn't mean that you need to start talking about personal issues like divorce. That's not appropriate. But it looks like, can I ask you a small favor? Or, I screwed up, can you help me up with something? Or even something like, help me how I might be wrong about this, or can I get your perspective? Each of these opens a vulnerability loop that gives another person an opportunity to respond. You see, there's this concern that in the business world we'll be seen as imperfect if we show these kinds of vulnerabilities. But researchers took this into account and ran an experiment. And they had people go in for a job interview and either give a perfect interview, or they dropped some papers on the floor or spilled some coffee on themselves. And what researchers discovered is that those who spilled and dropped actually scored higher in the interview. It turns out that when we're willing to be a little bit imperfect, people like us more. So next time you have some concerns about seeming like you don't have all the answers, it might be okay to actually ask a question or two. A few things will happen. The first is, let's say I come to you for advice. You're an expert. You know you're an expert. So when I come to you for advice, you're actually flattered. And you think I'm really smart for asking you for your expertise. Then by asking, I open a vulnerability loop. And when you say yes, the IKEA effect kicks in, and you're going to be investing effort into our relationship. By the end of that, you'll actually care more about me, my business, my results, and our relationship will be stronger. This is the kind of strategy that works really well when trying to expand into new markets and build relationships. Connect deeper with more customers, or just connecting with your coworkers in a meaningful way so that that relationship really succeeds. Now, there's one other important thing about trust that we should discuss, and that is that human beings don't really know what trust is made out of. And in general, it's made out of 3 things. The first is competence, that you have the ability to do the job that people expect of you. The second is honesty, that you are telling the truth. And the third is benevolence, that you have other people's best interests at heart. And here's what's amazing. Although those are the 3 pillars it's made out of, they're not all equally weighted. You see, for human beings, if somebody breaches competence, if you mess up one day at work, it's probably not a big deal. But if you find out somebody's lying to you, you will then begin to doubt everything they have said and everything they say moving forward. That means that honesty is valued more than competence. But imagine for a moment that we walk down the street and you say, John, can we stop at a friend's house to pick something up? And I say, yes. And when we get there, 40 of my closest friends jump out and scream, surprise, happy birthday. It would be very strange if I came to you and I said, you just lied to me. You broke honesty. We can't be friends anymore. That'd be really weird. And why is that? That's because you acted out of benevolence. You put my best interests at heart. So you can see human beings value benevolence above honesty and honesty above competence. And this is absolutely critical when we're connecting with people and building trust. You see, for human beings, we think that we want to demonstrate competence, like we're the best. But it turns out that the most important thing for us is to first show benevolence, that we care about other people. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're a company that sells server systems. And you come to me and you say, John, our servers are up 99.999% of the time. Now, here's what's really interesting about human beings. Although trust is made of these 3 pillars of honesty, competence, and benevolence, not all 3 are equally valued. You see, imagine for a moment you come into the office and one of your coworkers gives a presentation and it's just terrible. The coworker is normally fantastic, but today they messed up. Would you say, oh, they're incompetent, I can't trust them anymore? Or do you say, oh, it's probably just one-off? I mean, generally, we're pretty forgiving in a slip-up of competence. But if you were to find out that one of your coworkers lied to you, then you'd begin to doubt everything they have said and everything they say moving forward. You see, a breach in honesty is a much bigger deal than a breach in competence. But then there's this third characteristic, benevolence. And for this, let's take an example. Imagine the two of us are walking down the street, and you turn to me and say, John, I forgot something at a friend's house. Can we go pick it up? Of course, say yes. And as we enter, 40 of my closest friends jump out and scream, surprise, happy birthday. Now, you were so kind, you had just planned a surprise party for me. But you had lied to me to get me there. Would it be strange if I turned to you and said, you just lied to me, we can't be friends anymore? And the answer is, yeah, that would be very, very odd. And the reason is that you did it for benevolent reasons. You can see that human beings value benevolence above honesty and honesty above competence. Now, that doesn't give you an excuse to lie to people just because you have their best interests at heart. But it does demonstrate something really interesting about the way that people behave. You see, in American culture, the most trusted people are nurses because we feel that they are benevolent. People go into nursing to care for others. They're competent. There are tests and exams that will make sure that they have the capability to care for us. And we believe they're honest. There's no reason for them to lie to us. The funny thing is, the least trusted people are, well, not Danny DeVito specifically, but used car salesmen. And the reason is that we believe there's no reason for them to be honest. There's no reason for them to be benevolent, have our best interests at heart. And we believe that they're actually very competent at getting a lot of money out of us and us ending up in a terrible situation. So you can see there's this funny way that we relate to trust. And in general, what we've noticed is that human beings try to lead with competence rather than leading with benevolence. And I'll give you an example. Imagine your company sells server space. And you come to a customer and say, our servers are up 99.99999% of the time. That's incredible. That means you're amazingly competent. But imagine for a moment instead, I come to you and I say, hey, I know that for you and your company, your servers being up, that's your reputation. That's your employees' ability to access data and your customers' ability to order and fulfill on what they're trying to do. I understand that that is not something that we can mess with. And I'm going to give you my personal phone number. Day or night, no matter what the problem may come, I'm going to be there and we're going to figure it out together. Whatever it is, I'm there for you. Now tell me, did that feel different? Or did you prefer just me describing the number of nines that my servers are up? The fact of the matter is that for human beings, when you lead with benevolence, it actually just feels different, and people are more likely to do business with you. So, as you can see, when it comes to trust, there's a lot of things we do backwards. First of all, we try to win people over with gifts or with dinners and things, rather than finding opportunities for shared effort with that IKEA effect. We try to make big asks rather than using stacking and starting off with something small and then building up over time. We try to seem perfect rather than demonstrating vulnerability, which works better. And people try to lead with competence when really it's benevolence that will cause people to trust us. So now this brings us to the next question. What do we do with all of this? And let's be honest, these things have gotten a lot more complicated now due to COVID. So you'll remember that when COVID started, companies did this incredible thing. They took all of their in-person sales experience, events, everything, and they put it online, and it was incredible, mostly how terrible most of them were. You might remember companies doing things like fundraisers over Zoom and having terrible connections and low image quality and so on. And here's what's really important. As me and my research team started looking at this, we began to understand that when we're trying to connect remotely, the rules are a little bit different. You see, when I go to an in-person event, there are certain things that are intrinsic, that are naturally there, that we don't really think about. So there's this impression that I go to an in-person event, like you might go to a soccer match, or a concert, or a conference like this one, in order either to be enlightened, you're going to learn something, or you're going to be entertained, right? You watch a sporting event or a concert, you're entertained. But if that was just what we cared about, then we could sit at home and watch a soccer match and it would feel the same as it would when we went live, but it doesn't. And that's because there are two other characteristics. One of them is having an ability to connect. When you're with the crowd at that soccer game or at that concert or here at this conference that you're at, then it gives you an opportunity to feel connected to other people. The other aspect is a sense of influence. Because when you're at a concert, you can sing, you can dance, you can scream, you can shout. Your soccer game, you can boo. Like, you have an impact and you matter. But if you're sitting at the tail end of an 800-person WebEx, and you might as well be washing your dishes since nobody will notice that you're there or not. And that's the problem with digital experiences, is that they don't give us a sense of connection or a sense of influence. And what we know from research is that when people feel like they don't have an impact on their environment, it has terrible effects on them. In fact, a study looking at elder care facilities found that when you assigned people their bedtime and activities, they lived a shorter life than when you gave people even small options, like, do you want to go to bed at 8 or 8:15 p.m.? Just giving people influence has a dramatic impact. Part of the reason that we start off by playing some games at the beginning is to give you a sense of influence and impact. So let's look at how this actually unfolds when we're connecting with people and building trust on digital platforms. The first thing is, obviously, make things interactive. If you're with large groups, use polls to ask questions or put people into breakout rooms so that they can actually connect with each other. When COVID hit and I had hosted, as I mentioned, over 2,000 people at my dinners, I realized that we have an obligation to actually bring people together and give them information and something to do. So we designed an entire series of salons that were completely digital. There'd be about 150 to 200 people. We'd often have even like 3 Nobel laureates and Oscar winners and all these very kind of fancy people. And we originally planned for an hour and a half. And what was amazing was that people would stay on for 3 hours on a Zoom call. And the reason was we understood how to connect with people. When they first came on, we would actually put people into breakout rooms and give them questions to answer together so they can feel connected and get to know each other. Then when they'd come back, only then would we talk to them about ideas. We'd have 2 talks. Sometimes it would be the former head of the Center for Disease Control in the United States, or sometimes it would be somebody who ran a nonprofit talking about their cause. But we'd keep them short because we understood that people's attention spans were limited. And then what we would do was have some fun. We'd create a game for them to play. We'd put them into breakout rooms, and each breakout room would compete. And as a byproduct, that IKEA effect would kick in. They would feel more bonded and connected. You see, on digital platforms, games are actually phenomenal. They're highly effective, especially now when people are more stressed out than ever. Games are wildly fun, which brings me to another option. There are great platforms out there like Kahoot or Jack in the Box games. So option 1 is you can actually connect with people over games. Option 2, and this is an advanced move, what we actually started doing was creating games for companies to bring in customers. So I'm not going to be able to say which company specifically, but one of the largest tech companies in the world was looking to connect with people about a new product. And so what we did was we actually created a game show for them. Each of the questions was either about current culture or ideas having to do with the product. That way, every time somebody answered a question, we could fill in the gap afterwards by explaining and educating people about why a product like that would be important. We'd have about 5 or 6 people on, and then each round would have several questions, and using a second screen experience like Kahoot, which lets you put questions on a shared screen and people answer on their phones, it became an interactive, playful experience that exposed people to the brand and educated them in the process. Suddenly, as people are playing, they're bonding. They're putting in that IKEA effect of shared effort. Vulnerability loops are opening and closing quickly as they do. And suddenly, people are bonded more than they ever would just hearing about a presentation about a product. Fundamentally, it's more fun, interesting, and entertaining. The other things that we looked at is how do we create more intimate relationships between people? Specifically, when we are working with very large brands, they're dealing with 2 big issues. Issue number 1 is how do we engage our employees and let them feel connected to each other so that they want to stick around. In the US right now, we have a big problem known as the Great Resignation. People are switching companies left and right. They're looking for other opportunities. But researchers found that if you have a best friend at work, you're far more likely to stay. So we looked at ways of how do we connect people and build trust between them so that friendships grow and they want to stay with a company. And so by putting people into breakout rooms during meetings and letting them have real conversations, it allows them to connect in a few minutes, far more than after months and months of just being on calls together. Asking questions like, what's the hardest aspect of sheltering at home? Or what's the biggest area of improvement and potential growth? This gives people an opportunity to actually share openly and even contribute to one another. This is also potentially a great way for customers and salespeople to get to know each other. You see, one of my favorite things that I do on calls, especially when I'm meeting a client or potential partner for the first time, is I answer the first question they ask. In an American culture, that is, how are you doing? You see, this is a wildly underutilized technique, especially at distance. Because we're not in the same room, I want to be able to create familiarity. Now, most of the time when somebody asks this question, how are you doing? The immediate response is, great, how are you? Instead, I actually answer the question in a meaningful way. I'll say something like, you have no idea how excited I am this week. It's my first time in Seoul. I am loving the culture, and the people here are so friendly and kind. It's really just a privilege to get to meet people and make new friends. Now, suddenly, I've given you a glimpse into my life, my perspectives, and what I'm dealing with. And so, as a byproduct, you feel more connected to me. Next time somebody asks you how you're doing, actually answer. It could be anything from, oh, I'm having one of those crazy days where everything is actually going wrong, but I think I figured it out. Or, it's absolutely wild. Can I get your opinion on something? I just got this new project and I'm really excited about it. I'd love your thoughts. All of these things are fantastic vulnerability loops that you can open and close. Now, here's another important factor, and something that's especially at a distance, underutilized, and that's backgrounds. There's in fact an entire Twitter account where people send backgrounds and get them rated. And here's what's funny. Our backgrounds are one of these rare opportunities to expose people to our lives. Whereas beforehand, if I were to go in person into a meeting, the only information you'd have about me is basically the clothes I'm wearing or maybe my card in the company I work at. But now I can actually expose you to my family, my interests, the things I'm passionate about by curating my background, creating conversation starters in the process. This is a great way to either demonstrate common ground or create it. So if you're looking at a picture and there's a flag in the background or art, comment on it. Comment on people's books and say how interesting things look. Because if they have it in their background, it probably means it's important to them in some way. and it allows you to get to know them and connect and build trust. Similarly, it means that you should really consider what's in your background. What is it that you want to express about yourself? What is it that you'd want to talk about with people that would, one, make you look great, and two, humanize you so that they want to connect further? So there's often a question about, okay, how do I apply all these ideas? How do I bring them to life? So let's take a quick look and go through everything from the beginning. We explored a whole slew of ideas. The first thing is that human beings aren't logical. We don't make any sense. And we need to realize that we have to stop having this expectation that things will make sense. In fact, human beings are mostly guided by their emotions, and we have to be aware that we're mostly missing what's going on because of our inattentional blindness. So we have to trigger those things that guide our emotions. For human beings, our influence is a byproduct, not of our social media follower count. That's very nice, but most of the things that we really care about influencing aren't defined by the number of people who follow us on Twitter. Being able to connect with a potential client, getting our kids to eat a healthy meal, or getting somebody to take our ideas seriously are not going to be defined by your follower count so much as who we're connected to. Because if you're not connected to somebody, it's very difficult to influence them. How much they trust us, because if people don't trust us, then they're not going to opt in to be influenced. And the sense of belonging or community that we share. Because when people are highly connected, ideas spread faster, and we retain relationships better. That's what we learned from that obesity study that showed us that happiness, marriage and divorce rates, smoking habits, all spread through communities. So, a review of connection and trust and belonging. We explored that connection is often just a byproduct of familiarity. That just like the Mona Lisa is only popular for being stolen, and for everybody having seen the photo as a byproduct, most of the things that we care about, that we value, are simply the things that we've been exposed to more. That's why the more similar somebody is to us, the more likely we are to date them, according to that study from mobile dating. It means that what we want to do is either find those things that are familiar between us and other people, and I gave you an example of a game, and there are many others available on my website, or we want to create common ground through a shared activity. So that means we either want to find activities, interests, culture that we can share with people, or we want to create it. And so I gave the example that if we are going to do that, what we want to do is build trust through shared activities that require effort, such as running, exercise, painting, cooking, playing games together. We demonstrated that in the process, what's really important is that shared effort begin with small amounts and increase over time. So if I want to pull you in as a potential customer, I might start off with a quick question in an email and then elevate that more and more over time. Then what I want to do is find ways to increase the level of trust through vulnerability loops. And as a reminder, a vulnerability loop means that we either have to be paying attention when somebody else signals vulnerability, and then we acknowledge and complete the cycle, or if they haven't signaled vulnerability, and we want to build a more trusted relationship, it's our job to signal vulnerability so that they can complete the loop. We also explored the fact that when it comes to our relationships and them being trusted, trust is built out of honesty, competence, and benevolence. And that instead of leading with competence, what we need to do is lead with benevolence and demonstrate honesty and competence over time. Fundamentally, these are the things that trust is made of. Now, the key here, of course, is consistency. We can't expect that we just talk to somebody once and we'd have a community or a long-term relationship, but rather we have to do it on a consistent basis so that relationship grows over time. And that's especially effective if we can find ways to gather people, to bring them together so that they can connect with each other. Finally, when we look at connecting people across digital platforms, we want to focus on making sure that whatever we do entertains and enlightens, gives them a sense of influence and a potential to connect with others. These three things will mean that your digital events or meetings are exciting and people are looking forward to them. You can use games to educate or activities that will actually get people interacting. Put that IKEA effect into place. And if you do all these things, what you'll find is that your relationships will be richer than ever. That the only limitation on your influence really is how you want to use it. I'm excited to see how all of you apply these ideas and grow your businesses and your careers. I'm so honored to be here with all of you, and I thank you all for your time and your attention. And I look forward to seeing what comes next. Thank you.